Thank you. Thank you all for allowing us a quick break. Thank you, Mr. Mooney. Appreciate the conversation and the updates. We're excited to have Patrice here from CABE and CAPS. So welcome. Thank you. We always appreciate everything that you all do and the information that we get from an email standpoint and stuff like that, keeping us up to speed. So we appreciate it. So Dr. Adley, I'll turn it over to you and Patrice.
Sure. Good morning, Patrice. Thank you for joining us today. I always very much appreciate your availability and commitment to the district, and also that you also travel down this far, because it's not an easy travel, but it adds so much when you actually are here in person. So we really appreciate that. I do want to acknowledge that Patrice has been appointed and accepted.
It's been a long time since those
Wow, I really feel like I'm in the basement.
Okay. But Patrice is now the executive director of CABE, and we wish her well, and she'll do a super job in that leadership position. I'm assuming you're also holding some other hats and roles and responsibilities, but thank you, Patrice, and it's wonderful to have you at the helm. I want to thank the board too, by the way, from this morning. Even some ways I have to be here, right, and my staff have to be here, right, but you also have jobs and vacations and families also, and I very much appreciate your commitment to the day, because it is important. It gives us a wee opportunity to do some reflection. This is another opportunity here. We have been following since just after the first year that I joined the success strategies for leadership evaluation, which includes the board and the superintendent working together. We have tapped into CABE's and CAPS's plan. I will say that there are superintendents and other boards and stuff do things differently and have their own interpretation, but this certainly is a solid enough document and process that is helpful to us, and it sort of grounds us and gives us an opportunity to do some reflection. Thank you if you were able to complete the surveys. If for some reason you weren't, that's okay. You'll get caught up. I think we have enough of a nucleus who were able to participate. But with that, I'll turn it over to you. And I appreciate again, Patrice, your presence this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to come and visit with you. And I am a big fan of in-person meetings. I always was. And I think one lesson that I've taken away for the past 2 years is there is no replacing the in-person opportunity. I do commend you for setting aside the time on an annual basis to have a board retreat. I think it's very important, particularly in these challenging times, that boards of education take the opportunity to reflect on the successes, on the positives, as well as looking at where we going forward. How do we continue to improve our ability to function as a board? How do we continue to support the students and the staff in your district? So the reason that we ask you to fill out the self-evaluation form is that gives me an opportunity to look at where is there real consensus around strengths and maybe challenges that the board faces, and also where is there some differences of opinion. Some individuals thinking, gee, we're really doing great in this area, and others thinking that this is a real challenge for the board. So I use that to help me prepare for this discussion with you. And I really encourage you to interact and provide feedback. I'll look at some of the positives first, and then I'm going to give you some suggestions around some areas where you've identified as challenges, some strategies that you might use. Certainly there was great consensus around the district having a strong vision and mission that focuses on student achievement. And that's critical. And we'll come back to that, because if you use that as a touchstone when you're having challenging conversations, that often helps bring people back together to remember why you undertook this journey to be volunteer public servants, particularly in an environment where public servants are not necessarily appreciated as much as they should be. So given that, other positives, you identify that you use your policy manual to create a culture that supports your vision and goals. And again, the policymaking role of a board is your most important responsibility. And so making sure that you are using that and that it's up to date and that it's guiding your decisions is really very important. And you do that and you need to celebrate that. And there was also a lot of significant consensus around the fact that your ability to work as a group was positive. And that is such an important message because you are a public body, and particularly now that people have gotten accustomed to watching public meetings on a variety of technological means, you are on display and you are role models and you set an example. So how you interact, demonstrating civility, demonstrating respect for the views of others, not texting during meetings for legal reasons, in addition to the fact that it looks like you're not paying attention to the meeting. That public display of being able to have challenging conversations and respect the views of others is really very important. So celebrate that as well. Now, looking at a few areas where you identified that you could perhaps do better. One seemed to center around the board's ability and the board's ability to communicate with the public about the successes of the district. I've looked at the document that Dr. Adley prepared, the most recent update on the goals, and it looks like there's certainly significant efforts by the staff to communicate with the community, to communicate with parents. But you have, as a board, have identified that as something that you think you could do better. And so my question to you would be, what are the key community constituencies that you as board members would be able to reach out to and communicate with?
Could I just interject?
Yep.
I should have said at the start to my board members, I haven't seen this. So this is just my first take on what was put in. So I don't have what you sent in, so that, nor do I need it. So, okay.
Yeah. So thoughts about that?
Could you repeat your question? Sorry.
What are if one of your goals were to be to communicate more as a board with your community, what are some of the key community constituencies that you would identify?
Well, certainly parents, but more broadly taxpayers. I think our district communications are well understood. Sorry, I jumped in.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, Mr. Sini, that's fine. No, it's all good.
So I think a lot of our communications are from the district and directed, rightfully so, towards parents, but especially during COVID and the great challenges that we all faced, the community didn't have a good idea of what was going on. And it was a very difficult time. So, and that wasn't my comments. Whoever put that in, that was great. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mrs. McCowan.
I would reframe that. It's a good question, but I think one of the things that's happened is that communication has changed seemingly underneath us. So and I think over a period of time, I don't think in the last year or two, but very quickly in the last couple of years. So I think one of the things that we're struggling with, regardless of the constituency, is that information is moving faster than our board meetings are. So whether it's something happening on social media, whether it's an information campaign that's going on around us, whether it's, those are two primary examples. Or whether it's an area where we may want to be more sophisticated in what we're communicating out to various constituencies, whether it's how we think about our cooperation across town agencies and what we communicate out across town government. I think there's those fit sort of, that last one fits sort of more into your constituencies. That'd be more cross communication. But I think one of the things we as a board have to consider is how, when the board is in deliberation, or when the board has come to a conclusion, it makes sure that it gets information out at the speed of information as it currently exists.
I think Patrice, in being in this role, and I think we've done some good things over the last year and a half, and a lot of it is learnings, a lot of it has been feedback that's been given to me directly or given to the board, or given to me by the board. You know, we participated, I think, this year in letters to the state, and we did that by gathering information from the public, in that the public really wanted us to respond up to the state about, you know, where we feel or how we feel we want to manage the district, you know, around whether it was COVID or masking or hybrid or remote. We've done that around some legislation. I think about the town has embarked down and hiring a communication director, and that person has been developing kind of a newsletter or a community letter. So I think about, I think some of Jill's points is, should there be more of a voice of the board out to the community? I think we've done a better job of, around certain topics, having a public hearing so we hear more. We're trying to, if you were listening in on some of Mr. Mooney's conversation, we're trying to figure out how we do a better job interacting through those public hearings. I think we're very much conscious of, how do we set the record straight? You know, there's something happens and there's an immediate Facebook page, and that Facebook page takes a life of its own. Do we want to participate or not? How do we set the record straight? Is it a communication from the board? Is it a post? You know, how do we want to play in the social media world? I think what we're going to discuss a little later too is a communication committee. And I just think we've talked about it and talked about it. We're there. I think there's work to be done. I think we can work hand in hand with our partners at the town level in terms of what they're doing from a communication standpoint. So those are things that like pop up to me. I mean, I think I get feedback from the board sometimes as to what you think my public comment should be when I kick off a meeting. You know, unfortunate, some of it's been sad news and, you know, reflection type comments. But I guess, you know, I'd love to hear some best practices, or is there a board out there that you say, wow, has really nailed the communication thing? Jill talks about, and I've seen it, like other boards do a really nice, I'll call it just a slick, a front and a back. That's their way of communicating out to the public when we start going through the budget process. Like we talk about, how do we make this budget process better? I think we've learned some things we're building a new school, we're renovating 3 additional schools. I think we've learned there. I think we've done a nice job communicating as to what we're doing and how we're doing it. So I'll pause there. I tend to ramble, but I think those are some points I hope I got across.
You want
Mrs.
to
Best.
take other comments and then I'll respond.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was just going to add, I think that one thing we need to also consider is, what do we not communicate? Just communicating better doesn't always mean more. And there's a tendency to create another newsletter and put another regular weekly email out, et cetera. And that's not always beneficial or helpful. And I would also say that we have a lot of people who are much more interested and engaged than we have had, go back 3 years, but who also now find themselves without the time to stay interested, or excuse me, to stay as up to speed as they might like, because there's a lot that goes on here and most people don't have 4 hours to catch up on our meeting every other week. So I think that's kind of a key consideration as well. The input from the community is likely even more valuable, the better informed and up to date we can keep the community, so that we are getting quality feedback and comments.
I think the other thing, sorry, go ahead.
No,
Ms.
just to
Karen.
build on the last point that Julie was making, I think we need to be better about making sure that we incorporate the community feedback from all 4,700 children and the people that surround them. I think currently we hear the community wants, the public wants. Well, we're only hearing from the, I don't know, 50 to 100 people that, you know, regularly reach out to us. So how do we better get the opinions and the feedback from everybody? That's what I would like to see this communications committee, the focus be. Like, how do we get everybody?
100% agree with that. And you say 50 to 100, it feels more like 20. And it constantly being said, well, we all,
Right.
well, there's 10 of you, so who are we all? Like, so 100%.
Yeah, I think we look at, and yeah, you look, there's a core group of participants. Some of them are associated with PTOs and CDSP, and they try to bring the feedback up through their organizations, and we've definitely had a lot more participation from the general public. But I think it is a balancing act of, yeah, a Facebook page pops up, but how many people are behind that? You've got 4,700 kids, you got 9,000 parents, but then you got 21,000 people total in the community. So I think we balance not reacting and understanding, like, where is it coming from, and what's the goal at the end of the day.
Yeah, and building on that, first of all, I think your idea of working these issues through a communications committee is terrific. The creating more things, which of course we talk about this in terms of board communications, but we know that has an impact on staff in order to prepare those communications on behalf of the board. You asked about best practices. One recommendation is don't respond to everything that gets posted on Facebook or whatever social media. It is not productive. You could spend half your day trying to do that on behalf of the board. And the other thing is, if you as an individual respond, the perception, just like we talk about in every other context, the perception is that you're speaking on behalf of the board, but the board may not even have discussed the issue. Probably better to put something, if it's truly a major issue, put out a statement on behalf of the board that reflects whatever the board decision was or whatever considerations the board is taking into account, so that you don't feed into this social media explosion. Because again, it is true that you don't know how many people are behind it, and is it the same people that just keep posting over and over again? So that's my biggest recommendation in terms of a best practice.
So we've had a couple, anonymous websites pop up that have been, for lack of a better word, propaganda. They've taken on a life of their own. Like they've become this big snowball that if we're not responding to that, and I understand that that's best practice, it's noise, but it's harmful because it takes up time of Dr. Adley, it takes up time here, it takes our time. How do we deal with that? Or do we just, it is what it is and we have to deal with it?
Yeah, sometimes it's just better not to respond. If there's something that's being put out there that is factually incorrect, then a statement that lays out the facts, that doesn't argue the issue, but just lays out the facts, is, I think, the most effective thing to do. You don't want to start arguing on social media. That's not helpful to your community.
Yeah, or to yourself, yes.
Pardon me?
Or to yourself.
Yes, right. All right, other issues that I identified. There was also some discussion about creating more linkages with community groups. And I think we may have talked about that last year. But again, that's an ongoing activity to build support for your schools and to maintain support for your schools. I know that we've seen much more outreach in order to provide mental health services to our students, that, the community, we know that there is no school district that has enough resources within the school district structure to support the needs of students in mental health, but making those linkages with community service providers is more important now than it ever has been, certainly. You talked a little bit about your advocacy role and the fact that you've, initiated communications to state officials. That's terrific. We have tried to make it it's never easy to be an advocate, but we at CABE have tried to make it more doable. Certainly the fact that public hearings have been virtual for the past 2 legislative sessions has created certain challenges, but it has also meant that people are able to participate by testifying without having to come sit in Hartford for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. It does mean that the list of people interested in providing public comment has gotten even longer than it ever has been. So the hearings do go on extensively. One of the other areas that I think you definitely have success in is around professional development, that you have engaged. Looking at the report on your goals, you have engaged in additional activities. Again, we've tried to make it easier with the in-person we have a full schedule of in-person events coming up, starting with our summer leadership conference in August. But we will continue to provide our webinars, and virtually all of those, unless it's a topic that is so sensitive that we're concerned that recording it would restrict people's ability to have a good conversation. We do record those and we archive them on the CABE website, so they're available. You know, if at 11 o'clock at night, you suddenly have the urge to listen to a 45-minute webinar, it's there for you. And we are also going to continue the board chair check-ins to support our board chairs. We've now, obviously during the height of COVID, we were doing those on a weekly basis. We're now committed to doing them on a monthly basis. Your evaluation, one more thing related to professional development, that you all had general consensus that you do well in terms of providing an orientation for the board. Now, I know election season comes around sooner than any of us like to think about, but I just strongly encourage you to maintain that opportunity when you do get new members on the board, to make sure that as a whole board, you go through that process so that everyone is, on the same page, so that roles and responsibilities have been reviewed, because that will then help you continue to have effective and efficient meetings and have that good board superintendent leadership team relationship that is a lot of what is talked about in the document that CABE and CAPS prepared. Let's talk a little bit about board ethics, because I would say, and that's sort of a funny title for the group of things that we include in the board self-evaluation in this category, but this was an area where there was definitely a variety of perspectives as to how the board was doing. You have a code of ethics. One thing that we do at the CABE Board of Directors, and that a number of local school boards do, is every year, sometimes at the September meeting or at the organizational meeting, actually each board member signs the code of ethics as a way of reminding each other what they have agreed to in terms of their standards of conduct. We certainly know that in response to the question, that the board does not let politics interfere with district business. At all levels of government, there has been a growing trend, even among boards of education, which have tended to be, in Connecticut at least, not as partisan as other governmental bodies. We certainly have seen a trend of growing partisanship. I think committing to the code of ethics, committing to civility, and as I mentioned earlier, reminding yourselves that the mission and vision of the district is what brought you to this public service role. And focusing on that mission and vision can often help make sure that the political environment that we're all living in doesn't dominate at the board table. And I think that you certainly in your self-evaluation reflected on the fact that, you know, you are able to conduct your meetings with decorum and civility. And unfortunately, we can't say that for every Board of Education in the country and or even in Connecticut. So I go back to, you know, encouraging you to be those role models for your community. How a board conducts itself definitely impacts how community members conduct themselves when they come to make public comment. It impacts the culture of the whole district. When a board is setting a good example, when the board and the superintendent are working together, focused on student success, and I mean all aspects of student success, academic, as well as social emotional, then that permeates throughout the district. I'm going to stop there and see what questions and comments you have.
Mr. Seen.
One of the questions I had, we adopted the policy of having a student representative sit at the board table. I don't know if you were going to address that separately or I'd love to hear best practice around it. If you want to table it, that's fine.
I can certainly share my experience with student representatives, and I'll sort of start with the student representatives that serve on the State Board of Education. I think they are a wonderful example of meaningful student voice because their opinions are solicited and welcomed on a variety of topics. I would say the practice that I've observed in many boards, which I personally don't find to be particularly beneficial, is where the student representatives come to the board meeting. They're asked at the beginning of the meeting to give a report about essentially what's happening at their school. So they report on the blood drive and the upcoming dance and the sports activities. And then they are told, well, you probably have a lot of homework to do, so it's fine if you leave. And understanding that they probably do have a lot of homework to do, but part of my personal view is part of the responsibility of agreeing to serve on a board is to arrange your time so that you are able to be a meaningful participant, adults as well as students. So I think it's a missed opportunity because those students are not there for the substantive discussion. They're not there for discussion about new policies. So they don't have the opportunity to provide input, and they don't have the opportunity to hear what the other board members' thoughts are on the issue. So that's my, I describe that as not the best practice, although I will have to admit it is a prevalent practice.
So they really just provide their report and then listen in or have the option to leave. So our student reps have kind of participated throughout the whole meeting.
Good. I absolutely think that's the best practice.
Is there I think one thing we want to make sure is that we're fully hearing the voice of the students up there. So in, doing a little research, we have a process that went through the board as to how these students get nominated and elected, but I've heard that other schools align more with kind of the student council president or student government president or vice president, in that they were more elected by the full student population versus, running around and getting so many signatures from students, so many signatures from teachers, and going through an administrative process. So any insight as to the balancing act there? Because I think we do, if the one thing that we've got feedback on is like, please continue to listen to the students. And I think we do. And I think a lot of students have stepped up, and I think it's courageous of them to speak at public meetings on a wide range of topics. But I do want to make sure there's always this conversation about, do we do enough surveys of students? Do we get enough feedback from students? And maybe that's something they can develop on their own, but is there a best practice out there as to how do we find the right students to represent the full student body?
Yeah, and oh, go ahead.
I just want to add to that, if I'm not mistaken, the student reps do attend student council meetings,
Right.
and they are involved in those discussions, so as to make sure they're representing what's being
Right.
discussed.
I think it's more about how they're chosen. I think it's more about how they're chosen.
No, I
whether-
understand,
You know,
but,
it's, we're elected officials and they're just chosen. I think that's,
well, it's a little more involved than that, but yes, I just wanted to make the point that they are involved in the discussions among those who had been elected by the entire student body, those on student council.
Yeah, and I would say that the selection or election process, making sure it's representative is a challenge no matter what process you use, because two individuals can never necessarily represent your entire student population. What you might encourage them to do is build in a process where if they're not a member of the student council, they go back to the student council, or they do periodic surveys of the student body, so that so that they serve as that conduit, and they recognize that part of their responsibility is to communicate to their fellow students not only what the board is doing and considering, but getting that feedback from the broader student population. I think that's probably the best way, because I don't think there's no way, as in any election process, there's no way to guarantee that.
There's people running, there's people that win, there's people that don't win.
Right.
Any other thoughts, questions around that? This is best.
Back to kind of ways that we can all kind of hold ourselves accountable to why we're here in the first place, and to remove partisan politics to the best of our ability from how we operate. Are there any best practices around calling on one another or calling on ourselves to try to couch our points and our comments in our overall mission and vision, tying things back to public education, tying things back to the student experience, the sort of overarching things we're here to deliver?
That's an interesting, I mean, it really is a matter of supporting each other. And the chair has, of course, a role in that. The chair can ask that someone reframe their comment, or, and that's a delicate balance, because everyone has a right to free speech, and as Attorney Mooney was discussing. So I think it is a matter of agreeing as a group that your norm, what's your meeting norm going to be in terms of how you frame your comments. Again, that doesn't mean that from time to time, in the heat of the moment, in a lively discussion, that someone may not necessarily adhere to that. But if you agree as a group that that's a standard that you want to embrace, I think that's the best approach.
Mrs. McCammon.
There are two, I think, things that we've struggled with at the board table. One is around this partisanship, and that it's hard to know sometimes what the board feels and what the public is saying that we feel about each other, or the board or the public feels about us. There are times when our decisions where we disagree pretty strongly. And I think there's been an increasing effort by the public to describe our decision-making as partisan in nature, whether we as individuals feel that or not, and whether our fellow board members feel that or not. But we've certainly seen that. I think that's a struggle. And I think as a board, we could decide whether we want to continue to hold that or not, or whether as individual board members, whether we want to continue to participate in that kind of dialogue or not. The second thing I think that we have debated somewhat in the recent future is sort of the role of the educational expert versus the role of the board. It's come up in a couple times where we've made decisions that are not black and white. And we've been either told one another or we've been told by the public to listen to the educational experts. And I think there are boundaries to that. So have you seen that happen on other boards? How have you seen other boards respond to that?
Could I just add to that
Yeah.
a little bit? I think two great points, Jill. I think back of some of the stuff that we've discussed or we brought to the table too. It's that balancing act. And I think it goes back to communication of educating the public of what our actual role is in terms of what some of the public feels that we should be involved in day to day that are really operational / educational issues. And I think we've listened to the community and we introduced a curriculum committee and done stuff like that, which I think makes total sense. In my years on the board, we didn't have one, we had one, we didn't have one, now we have one. I think having one makes sense. And I think a lot of that was listening to and getting feedback from the public. But I do think there's this constant, and I don't know how we do it, education or communication that we need to have with the public fully understanding what our roles are. And I
So
hope that didn't cloud Jill's questions.
a couple of thoughts, and if
Yeah.
I don't, if I don't touch on what you were getting at, you'll tell me. Yes, the communication with the public about roles and responsibilities. You can do a public information session about the role of the board. You can use some of the material in this document that talks about what's the role of the administration, what's the role of the Board of Education. But when you're really going to need to have that communication with the public is when you have one of those hot issues. And I think maybe making it clear at the beginning of the discussion that, the administration is going to make a recommendation based on educational issues. Remember that in the past 2 years, we've had three major players here. The board is the policymaking body, the administration is the educational leaders, and the public health officials. And all those play, and depending upon the issue, sometimes we all had to listen to the public health officials and use that as our touchstone, even if we thought that maybe in-person learning the balance was educationally, that was so valuable. But if public health experts said that's not safe for your community, we deferred to their expertise. So I think helping the public understand the expertise that is applied in different situations. And certainly helping them understand that day-to-day operation, you are not elected to run the schools, you're not elected to evaluate the teachers, you're not elected to supervise the playground, and you're not elected to go up on the roof and shovel the snow off. We did have a board member that said they were going to do that. They were stopped. Their shovel was taken away. Not on this board, not in this part of the state, small rural district. So did that answer your comment, Jill? All right, try again. I'll try.
So there are times when we come to decisions that might have to do with where it's not black and white, where education begins and ends. And your public health example was a good one of that, or where the community needs are not exactly the same as the educational needs, or whether we're deciding whether or not to prioritize a new initiative, or where there's an initiative that comes forward that isn't black and white, and board members may truly feel in their heart of hearts that while they respect and care for the superintendent, it's not something they can proceed with for XYZ reasons. And so I think we walk always a fine line of honoring the staff that sit here and the hard work that they do, and yet needing to vote our conscience. So how have you talked to boards about how they walk that line about, what it means to listen to an educational expert when maybe you can't for whatever reason? I think we saw this come up in, for example, in the, people who felt that about the vaccine debate. I think we talked about it last year a little bit, or legalization of marijuana, and what if something was, so that's my question.
I think what I'd say to boards is the important thing is to be listening with an open mind to the educational experts. That's an important part of your role, as well as then communicating at the board table or elsewhere what your personal beliefs are, but based on what you have heard from the educational experts. So making that connection, so it's not two separate issues. It's educational expertise, and yes, there are personal philosophies, but then remembering to always tie that back to what is best for the students, how does this decision reflect the mission and vision of our district?
I can be pragmatic about that. Just like going both ways, right? I mean, literally going both ways. We better be on the same page most of the time, or it's not going to work. Let's just say that. Right? Yeah, I just mean if it's constantly, I want my way and get my way, for want of a better term, from administration, then that's not going to work, right? So there's a feeling that we're not listening to each other. Like, there's things I would ask the board to do, haven't done. Do I like it? Sometimes no, right? And you'll probably know those occasions, but I think it's like there has to be an understanding there that there are times that's the role of the board. That is the balance checks. That's the purpose of a board. But once it weighs out too much one way on a constant basis, it's just not going to work then, right? Under that scenario. So I mean, I'm just trying to give you an honest answer back.
Mrs. Worm.
I think, what you're talking about is how to communicate that to the public, right? And
That's a component of it. Yeah.
yes, and where the board's responsibilities are and where it lies with administration, and when sometimes it's gray, and how we communicate that. And I think that just goes back to educating the public on different things and having a communication committee, and making sure that when the board makes a decision, whether it's unanimous or not unanimous, that is the board decision, and that needs to be communicated clearly to the public.
Yeah, that's another very important point, that you can, you may not have a unanimous decision, but the action of the board is the board's action, and that is what stands and what needs to be communicated.
Mr. Sini.
It's interesting. I think we all focus on like one specific issue. It was a very difficult issue and say, it's either we're a politicized board, but if you go through, Sarah's voting history in minutes, we were on the same page. I think well over majority of our votes are unanimous. A vast majority are bipartisan. And there's only like a sliver where we fall upon partisan lines, if we do. And so I think as board members, and maybe this goes back to communicating that, like, we got a great record, and we have in my humble opinion, got a great balance with what Dr. Adler just said. There is some push and pull, but I think that's the role of each of our roles. So that's just my personal opinion.
Go ahead.
And so just to build on that, I agree. Most of the time we are on the same page, and the 9 of us want what is best for our students and our staff and our town. I think I would love your advice here a little bit. What's tricky is I feel like over the past, I don't even know, 5-6 years, there's been more influence from the outside political parties, whether that's the town committees, whether that's the state level, whatever. Should we put blinders on? Or where is our role in that? I mean, we're elected by our town. by the constituents. And should we then sit here as individuals voting our conscience and what we feel is best? Or how much do we pay attention to what's happening and who may be in our ears?
I mean, certainly if you're not going to put blinders on and not listen to constituents. I think what's important is that you have a balance so that you're not listening to only one constituency. So, you know, if your social group is all parents of school-age children, you do also want to hear from senior citizens in the community, from single people that have moved out of New York City and are living here now. You know, so that you do reflect the community as a whole. Obviously, your focus is on students. So what you hear from parents, what you hear from teenagers that are friends of your children, that all is information that you take in. You're not beholden to, you know, whether it be a town committee or other elected officials. You are an independent body. The Connecticut statutes are very clear about that. So you are elected to represent the community at large and act in the best interests of the students.
Mr.
I
Maroney.
want to touch back on something you said is, excuse me, you know, it's on, but maybe I need to eat the mic as well. I think the 9 members of the board agree that when the board decides a decision, that decision moves forward. And that's the will of the board. What I think we sometimes have trouble with, if that's the right word, is the community doesn't understand that. The community says, how do we change that? And we disagree with the vote of the board, and we want, and how do we respond and react to that push and pull from the community?
Again, you're the decision-making body. And so when you've acted, unless circumstances change, unless there's information that the board didn't have when you made the decision, the decision stands. I think that the next step is helping the community understand why this is in the best interest of the students, or why, because of the budget constraints, you can't do something that the community wants you to do, you know, add a new program, for example. And then if it's a situation like that, help the community members have the tools to advocate in the next budget cycle. If they want a new program and the board agrees this would, and the administration agrees this would be valuable for the students, well, how are we as a larger community going to help make that happen?
I do think that, you know, it's a good point. And I think, you know, if you want to use an example, I think we're going through this process with our lights agreement up at the high school, and the agreement that's in place for 5 years is up for review. We want to change it. So we've had this dialogue where the administration brought forward a recommendation. We brought in the public. We've heard a lot from the public, from the other groups in the community that use the fields. And at the end of the day, the board landed, you know, at one time, and the administration was recommending another. But I think we all got to the same page as to why we wanted to do this and move it forward to planning and zoning. And then, you know, through that process, you get people that are just going to use, well, the administration said this and you didn't agree with the administration. No, we had a conversation around it as a board, and we listened to the community, we listened to the administration, and as a board, we came to the conclusion that we think best interest of the students, the community, and our roles, this is the direction we want to go in. So, you know, I think it was a healthy dialogue. And then you got to deal with those folks that are just constantly going to use it as a dagger against you as you go through the process to get it approved.
That's where board communication comes in, right?
Yes,
So, yeah.
bingo. Yeah. Jill.
I think the answer might be board communication again, but have you had any boards who have dealt with legislators inserting themselves into board I'll just use the broad word, broad business, board business.
Yes.
What do you
Um,
advise boards?
Now, again, they are constituents, assuming they live in your community. And having that conversation, sometimes that can be a conversation that you invite your legislators to a board meeting. Have a conversation about the issues the board is going to be facing, the decisions you're going to need to make, so that they have that background before you get to actually, having to take a board vote. But again, I think it's a matter of, yes, you're going to listen respectfully, just like you would to any of your constituents, just like you would to recommendations from your administration, certainly. But you recognize that this is a voice in the community.
What if they're not?
What if they're not?
Constituents.
If we live in a gerrymandered state.
Tell me about it. I've just been redistricted.
Yeah.
Same.
I
Same
think,
here.
I think it's the same thing, that you're going to listen respectfully. You're going to weigh that along with all the other information that you have on any given issue.
That's where I think we rise above the politics that those
Ignoring.
people may be trying to insert. Yeah, good. Patrice, anything else specific? Great conversation. Thank you. Anything else specific to the evaluation you want to touch base on?
No, I think we've really covered the things that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah.
And your conversation has been terrific. That's the important part, really.
Yeah, the only other thing that we're gonna talk about later, and this has come up throughout the year, and we've gotten guidance from Mooney, and Alan and Chris are gonna talk about it, but there's, unfortunately, when there's incidents and the public, nothing is so private anymore, but we've been not dragged in, but constantly asked why we're not involved in the discipline process. And that the discipline process isn't fair. Who makes the decisions and how can you not know? And you've got it. And then, we all have, it's a small town. We all have friends, like you got to do something because this is, he grew up with your, that type of routine. So, and I think the response is pretty clear. It's not our role. It's not our responsibility. It's private. It's about a student. We have a role, maybe as it goes through the process toward the end, but I don't know, any words of wisdom?
Again, stay on that
Stay on course.
message, because it really is, and if approached by a parent or another community member, how would they feel if it was their child that was being disciplined and
Yeah.
you were speaking about the incident and what should be done to Susie or Johnny? It's also a policy issue though. So in the discipline area, you as a board have acted, you've established policies about student discipline.
Yeah.
And it's the job of the administration to apply those and not to bring discipline is only effective if it's administered close to the time of the behavior. So,
Right.
even if anyone thought it was a good idea for the board to be involved, waiting for the next board meeting to decide what to do is not effective.
I think too, what my thought process in the conversations I've had with Alan and feedback from the board and even Mooney, of course, where I'm going to go with this is communication. And I think there is some communication to be done to the parents around, look, there are standards for being a good student, being a good athlete, and there are consequences that can be pretty black and white. You do this, it equates to that. But other stuff, it does lead to an investigation, and then that investigation leads to a decision by the administration as to what the consequences are. And it isn't always as black and white as a handbook. So I think that's something that we can work on. Yeah, Mrs. McCabe.
Just while we have you for a few more minutes, you may or may not know that we're a community who's in a suicide post-vention phase. And of course, we are also just responding to the larger mental health issues that many communities are facing in addition to that specific characteristic. I just wanted to know if there's anything that you are specifically seeing boards do that you have found particularly effective and how they are approaching this issue. And I'm not asking you for, I'm asking from the perspective of how boards operate, not what do you do from a,
Right.
Right.
Certainly resources for mental health supports for students is a top priority of I would say all boards at this point. So, you know, that becomes a budgetary matter. It also becomes, I talked about linkages, connecting community resources. One of the real challenges is there is a lack of mental health professionals available to serve young people, particularly our youngest. And there are some efforts at the state level to expand that pipeline, but that's not an immediate, you know, that's not going to happen overnight. So I would just say that what I have seen is making the mental health needs a priority.
thank you.
Sure, Dr. Adler.
Patrice, could you help just as we wind this discussion down, because we'll later on we're going to transition into board goals and so on. We have a district strategic plan that's endorsed by the board and the community that we're actively working on. The board does its goals. So just sort of this past year, the board has done sort of amalgamation of a couple of ideas, a couple of professional goals on their own, and then other priorities for the district. How do you see the distinction between board goals, the strategic plan, and district goals of that whole concept, right? Because we're going into that this afternoon, so I just want to your thought.
Sure. Very often, board goals consist of a combination of things that the board can do that support the strategic plan, as well as goals that are personal to the board itself, that have to do with board functioning. So a good functioning board is key to supporting the strategic plan. If you're not working well as a board, if you're not working as effectively and as efficiently as possible with the administration, that's going to be a drag on the ability to fulfill the strategic plan. So I think looking at it certainly is very appropriate and actually very common to have that combination. They're not isolated from each other.
Mr. Brown.
Just to follow up to that, thinking about a strategic plan, I mean, in the example we've had over the past few years with COVID, people who had adopted a certain strategic plan ahead of time would have to adapt.
Yeah.
So even now, hopefully we don't have that coming again, but as we look at our strategic plan, I appreciate the effort of developing a framework and having goals to measure against, but we're not necessarily stuck with that. We can modify and change over time. That's a malleable living document.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, resilience and adaptability are things that we've certainly all, if we didn't have them when we started 2020, we certainly have had to develop them.
Thank you.
Mrs. McCann. You're good? Good. Anything else? Well, thank you, Patrice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Always good dialogue. Thank you for all the work you do. And good luck in the new role.
Thank you very much.
And we appreciate the time and the travel.
Good luck to you.
Thank you. There may be some, if you need a bite, there may be some lunch that's been delivered. Please help yourself. So,
Have a good afternoon.
yeah, thank you. So we're a little bit behind schedule. So do you want to roll right into starting to discuss some of the operational stuff for the next 15 or 20 minutes and then break for getting some food and kind of do a kind of a working lunch and continue the dialogue? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. All right, thanks again, Patrice.
Bye-bye.
So we'll go over to Dr. Adley's organized kind of some thoughts, and some of this is feedback that I think we've discussed over the years. Some of it's feedback that we've gotten that I've gotten from the board and just in conversations, and we can add and delete as we kind of go through the list. I don't know, do you want to add anything to that, Dr. Adley?
Yeah.
Sure.
Thanks. So some of these are just the administrative, at the last board meeting, or one of the last board meetings, we talked about, well, can I bring some thoughts to it? So I'm just bringing some thoughts to it. I would say the biggest thought is, if we've talked a lot about making some decisions, stuff, can we just make some decisions in terms of like whether it's public comment or
What do you think, John?
otherwise? That would be most helpful. So
I think, and not to interrupt, but just to, what you and I have discussed, and I think some of the stuff on here plays into that. I think our goal is always to continue to have the most efficient meeting. That's out of respect, especially for you and the cabinet here, in terms of the time and energy you put into building the meeting and the agenda, but the time and energy you spend after hours. So, efficiency is key. Having the right conversation is key. But I think it's also the board taking the responsibility to really look through the data, do our own homework, and bring our questions to the table. So I think we've made a lot of progress on 30-page decks going to 10-page decks, and really having the right summation or information that we feel we need to continue the dialogue and ask the questions, and that we feel, and that it's important that the public feels that they're informed too. There can always be plenty of documents or information behind, the deck or the presentation, but I think that's a goal, is to continue to have, efficient meetings. I think we'll talk about, I'm not sure we'll make decisions, but we'll put in place items that need to go to an agenda in short order, to kind of work through some of this stuff. So.
okay, well, if you want me to talk about it, well, actually, there's one that maybe one or two have left off, and I'll just start with that. All right, so these are pragmatic issues, okay? So they're not high level stuff. So, and I'm not trying to dominate the discussion with administrative stuff, but it was asked for just some things, so I just bring in some
Yeah.
things. The first one is every time you get an agenda, you have a summation memorandum that I do. It's really a waste of my time if it's not productive to you, because even though it looks short, there has to be thought put into it, and it sort of elaborates a wee bit more on each of the agenda items. Do you want me to continue to do that? Are you using that? Or it's okay to say to me not, because I'd rather you tell me really not that helpful. So, and the agenda item speaks for itself, or not.
If it's not obvious in the packet. So there've been some times, for example, when we're going to go to executive session and you're not going to include materials and it's just a brief warning. So that's an example where I find the memo helpful so that I'm prepared for what we're going to discuss. Or if there's other contextual information that's not a part of the packet. But I don't find just a summary for the sake of summary to be helpful.
I would agree.
Okay,
Great.
I can take.
I find it helpful as a quick read. I think you maybe go into more detail than you need to, but I think if there's something you really want to highlight, maybe use it in that methodology.
All right, so I'll try and pick on the
Yeah.
things I think need a wee bit more, right?
Yeah, you might want to just say it straightforward, or, it's,
Yeah.
I'm not,
You could say deck really speaks to,
Okay. Again, these are no priority
Sure.
or significance, right? I would suggest that we continue with the retiree luncheon. It's a nice opportunity. I think it elevated a bit. Chartwell's did a super job. Mars and the team.
So
So can I just add to that? I think it was phenomenally done and well done. The only thing I would ask is, do we need the recognition of the retirees at the graduation?
Yeah, that was my question too. Because it was the same thing that was done Tuesday night, was on Friday night.
Can I
And is it more
add that,
public?
but listening to those recognitions of people who had spent decades in the district, to me, and I know they had family members in the audience for that reason.
can,
I kind of loved it.
or can we split it in that, the three, whatever the 2-page reading is at the retiree, but there's
Yeah,
an
I think
abbreviated
to
version.
read the same script at both events, I think that graduation needs to be, I think it is, but we need to always keep focused on 2 hours. Some of it depends on the size of the class, and maybe, we all need to think about the length of our speeches too, but I wanted to stay focused on the celebration of the students and their accomplishments. But I do agree with your point that some recognition of the retirees, but maybe not a full reading of.
That one is a hard one in the sense of, my understanding, that's a long-standing tradition here in terms of the speech and recognizing the graduation. That's a tough. it's,
Retirees.
it'll matter significantly, right? It's
I
not an
want
easy
them
one.
recognized.
Yes.
Just to be clear, my position, I want them recognized,
Yeah.
but the same speech, that length as a parent and as somebody who sat there for 2 graduations now in a row, it's a little lengthy. So if there's a way we can recognize them individually too, not as a group, but maybe cut down the time. frame.
Well, is there anything else that we do in addition, whether it's the retirement ceremony itself or whether it's a graduation or anything else we debrief after this? Is there anything we could do differently or anything we should reflect upon? So that's.
Thank you.
Well, can I ask a quick question? Are the people that are giving the speeches, are they given a time frame? Because there was definitely, some of the speeches they were all amazing, but some were very to the point, and then some went on for a really long time.
That issue we can address and should address, right? Because
Yes.
for a number of reasons, we should address that.
That one is even that one person is being spoke about for 1 minute, and another one is like 12.
So I'm just going to run down these and you can stop me if you want. Consolidate the board goals, strategic plan, diversity, equity. Some of these reports collapse these into, not to avoid a conversation, but to, just as you said, Mr. Chairman, have efficiency.
Any conversation around
I'm
that?
sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, just in the spirit of efficiency.
Yeah.
Not to avoid, like, I think we can do it all in one.
Sold.
Provide a monthly mental health and wellness update. I think we want to do that, so.
Yeah.
I would motion that we do one extended year school report, because it tends to be redundant in nature, and one in the fall, perhaps we'll summarize the summer and start for moving forward.
So only do the one in the fall?
I'm
And then
taking,
you
I'm
would-
taking
And
a,
then you give, I don't know, it's up for discussion. We always get an update as to, are we prepared? What do you need? And how's everything going for summer school and ESY?
that's more of a, that to me is more of a, if the board feels that is a need, because otherwise, of course, we're prepared.
You
No, I
come
don't
to
mean it- I
us,
don't mean- I don't mean- and you don't mean it that way, and I don't mean it that way, but that's,
you would come to us if there's a problem.
So that's fine. So let's, okay, good.
certainly in respect to Mrs. Harrington, who provides these opportunities for our staff, but I would suggest that that could happen at a curriculum committee meeting or otherwise. It could be reported out as part of Rich's annual recognitions and so on. The title grants, those funds are anticipated and included in the regular budget process. So when you approve the budget, you're approving the grants as well. So there's optics to that. Ms. Brown?
I think there's never an opportunity where we have to vote to accept. I mean, we would just, if there is, we would take that.
Sorry, I didn't catch the first part, David.
If we ever had to take a vote to accept, we would take such a
Oh,
vote.
yes.
Ah,
Yeah.
Okay, that's all. Fine. Sounds
Wherever
great.
you're legally mandated to do that, yes, absolutely.
All right, just double checking. Thank you. Sounds good.
So I said, present the budget initiatives the first week in November.
With that is, just to make, I guess the question is, elections also happen the first week in November. So are we going to make sure you present to the new board or the old board?
Well, I would also
Does it
point,
matter?
like, I just note that, like, it's not as if we haven't done this. We did this in the second week in November, and I understand that, yeah, but Alan, there were some things that need to be fleshed out a wee bit more, right? And I would recognize particularly the digital one-to-one and so on. So I recognize that. I guess I'd have to look at that. Well, I would take your advice. If you want it the first or second,
For me, it's just, personally, Alan, I just would like to have it done in November. And I don't want, my second question to that is the 1st of November too early for you? I mean, whether it's the 1st, the 15th, but sometime before we get our budget packet, I would like to have the information.
So I guess, your question is good. Can we break this in two in terms of understanding? So I think what you did this year, and you might have done it earlier than November, you gave us kind of bullets as to what you were thinking about. That would be coming through the process. So is this new budget initiatives during first meeting of November? Is this the initiatives with the dollars, or is this just what you're thinking about putting in the budget? Because we got a one pager that was great with what you were thinking about in terms of new initiatives or changes, didn't necessarily have a dollar amount associated with it, but kind of gave us a heads up to start thinking. about
I
the
think it was
process.
at that point, I mean, this is bringing this, if you bring it the first week of November, that's like, we start already in September with it. So it's even advanced in that. So.
So then, to that point, do we need something in October that kind of primes us for what you're thinking about?
No, if I can help it.
But so, no, I understand time and energy and all that type of stuff, but I guess where I'm heading with this is we constantly talk about the budget cycle, and I think we also need to figure out where we are as a board with what we want to take on and have that conversation with you about capacity, about resources, about how do we execute. In other words, I'm at the point now where we have so much going on, like what more can we take on and do effectively, right? We're building a building, we're moving kids into a building, we're renovating 3 schools, we're working on DEI, we've got a huge amount of work to do on mental health. So like, I think as a board, we need to talk about, how much more do we want to take on versus how do we want to focus on what we are already taking on and how well do we want to execute on that? All right. I'm in the mode of almost, it's time to pause. It's time to work on what we really need to work on, prioritize and focus. There's going to be constant hiring challenges. All right. And staffing challenges. I mean, we just have to be real about that, in terms of where we are from an economy standpoint and education standpoint. And while I think as a board, we're like, what resources do you need? It's not necessarily easy to find those resources. So I think at some point in this process, maybe we're having it a little bit now, like, I think we need to say, like, we may not want to see any new initiatives, right? Because we need to execute on what we're working on. I mean, it's just, I think it's something we have to think about. Sorry.
So I'm wondering if, based on what you're saying, this conversation's a little more complex than it looks in a bullet. And if we maybe want to sort of flesh it out a little bit with maybe a little bit of a timeline, some discussion, and maybe park this until next
Absolutely.
meeting.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, just if you think about, some of it may be easy, a lot of it you're probably doing or know what you're doing. But if you just think about what Mooney went through this morning, there's a bunch of stuff in there that's been added to your to-do list, in terms of on your regular jobs, and that's just a constant. So I just think we need to have a balancing act. Mr. Brown.
So 2 things, just following up on your comment and Mr. Maroney's. One, I like the word pause. I think just throwing that out in response to what you said. But I think Dennis brought up a good point in terms of where does the demarcation between the work of the old board and the work of the new board in November. And so as much as we'd like to see that sooner, if we are going to have a new board engaged in the budget process and do that deep dive, that's probably another question we need to consider. I think that's a great point you raised.
My comment to that is that if you're going to want to run for the Board of Ed, you're most likely following the conversations and are watching and are involved. So you're not, a newbie is not going to sit to a chair and have no understanding of what's going on.
And
would hope.
I think you're right, Sarah, because that was the other question about where, what's kind of being floated and what's out
Yeah.
there, which maybe we'd love to hear that sooner. But I think the real budgetary implications, maybe that comes when the new board's here, I guess maybe would be right.
It's a good point. Mrs. Warren.
I just wanted to comment on, I am 100% with you that we need to take a pause and make sure that we're doing the things we're doing correctly. And I think the mental health is such a big issue. And we're still really, I personally am still waiting for answers to a ton of questions. So until we tackle that and tackle it well, I don't want to see any new initiatives.
Mrs. Best.
Just a couple thoughts. First, just to point out that we did just decide to make a project out of not trying to create new projects. So just a little self-awareness on that one. But I was also going to say that a new budget initiative doesn't necessarily mean, and I don't know what it would look like, but it could be ways to be more efficient, ways for
Sure.
us to be simplifying the things that we're already doing. Again, you're going to hear from me a lot on what are we taking away, because we are adding so much. I don't know that pause is necessarily the word I would use, but constantly looking to optimize, meaning do things there the best
Well, I
way.
think it's prioritization, it's optimization, it's executing on what we're doing and making sure we feel good that we can execute at 110% as to what, there's certain things we really just, everyone at this table knows we've got to get right. It's around, what does the beginning of the school year look like around mental health, support, services, stuff like that.
I would push back also on the word pause. Like, I think your education doesn't pause. right? So we can't just stop doing what we're doing and only focus on what, we need to focus on what we can do better and what we can do well. And if that means introducing a new initiative, great, like I'm fully open to that.
So I'll agree the word pause was wrong. I will retract the word pause. But I will tell you, we have
Prioritization.
we have so much going on that, and to Tara's point, there's stuff that I think, there's questions that have come up that we want answers for. There's updates on different things. And I go back to making, and I know you guys understand we're here to support you and provide the resources, but personally, I'm sorry, I worry about all that we have going on. I do. And the bandwidth of people and our cabinet and teachers and administrators, their mental health and emotional health and capacity. Everyone has families. There's a lot going on in this district right now. And I just want to make sure we continue to deliver the best education that we do every day and execute on all that we have going on. So I'll pause there for a moment.
Right, and I also use the word, I also could exchange the word initiative, if there are any, right?
Yes.
I mean, you're talking about major things here we're talking about. So I'm just, the board asks if you have any initiatives, bring them forward early. So that's what.
Yeah.
that's meant.
So, okay, so just wrapping it all
Yeah,
up
can we-
without commenting on the pause or the prioritization. I think we do need to kind of figure out, to meet Alan's request in terms of how he wants to present his ideas for the next budget and when.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And
maybe
I'm
we're not
gonna-
gonna figure that out today,
Yeah.
but let's.
All
maybe
right, so
bump
that's still
that.
open.
Although, remember, he did ask for us to make some decisions.
I know, well,
Well, we have
it's one
done.
bullet.
We have- we have
We
done.
can- We can punt one bullet.
I'm just suggesting not to remove it completely, but move the 5-year projection limit to the finance committee and including the curriculum update, because it didn't seem to get tremendous traction at the board level. So I'm thinking that might be most useful to do that.
Including the committee update, not the curriculum update.
Pardon?
You said curriculum.
I'm just,
It's fine.
so it
Okay.
didn't get
Oh,
confusing.
yes.
But yes, I'm in agreement.
Thank you. We just discussed public comment, so I don't know when we're going to make a decision about it, but
So do we want to talk about that right now for a little bit? Okay. And then do we have the ability to make a decision or
We'd have to put it to an agenda.
so that, but then we can get it on the next meeting's agenda as discussion and action.
Do we have to have action on a meeting construct though? I guess it's a
Can we make
question.
a motion to amend the agenda to put it on if we can't?
No, you
Yeah,
can't, you
special
can't.
agenda.
Yeah.
Special meeting.
Special.
But we can come to a conclusion.
So
Go ahead, Mr. Sini.
I love the idea of limiting that first public comment to like 20 or 30 minutes and then allowing unlimited at the end. But there are too many instances where we're here way too late at night, not doing the board's business, but frankly, listening to constituents argue with each other across the table. And we just cannot do that again. And we really pushed some really important discussions to very late at night. And that impacted this board's ability to do its work. And so I'm emphatic about at least limiting that first one. So it may, or to the agenda items or something. So we can get to the board's work quicker.
Okay, Mrs.
So
Parent.
I'm sorry.
I
Yeah,
have a
go
feeling
ahead.
we're going to say the same thing.
Okay, I agree. I think, I think when we have outside people come in and we are asking them to wait till 10 o'clock to talk, like it's not helpful. So the limit of, I would say 30 minutes is fine. I do think we need to be cautious of how we do it with people in person and then people remotely. So do you do one in person, one remote, one in person, one remote?
And students, I
And-
think if students here, I think they need to be prioritized if students are here.
Yeah.
To make them wait until the end of the meeting.
But yeah, we can manage
Yeah,
to
I-
the legal requirements,
Right.
definitely.
My point was just that, yes, I like the idea of limiting to 30 minutes, but if it's a
Okay.
topic where we have a lot of students show up,
Right.
I don't want to push them till the end of the meeting.
Okay.
If we
We
could
can
just
establish
prioritize-
kind of that.
And you can put a
criteria.
disclosure down at
Yeah.
the bottom.
Right.
Yeah.
We give preference. Yeah, students.
30
Okay.
minutes sounds
Mr.
good.
Brown.
I would just propose a slight twist to that. I like the 30 minutes, but I would propose we just do it all at the end. Because your point earlier about informing the discussion with our actual meeting itself, instead of people coming in half informed, or we have the chance to provide information, I would just throw that out for consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Maroney.
I love the idea of 30 minutes, but there's another part of my brain which is saying that But I also hate the idea of like in the RTM of calling the question, because there's always someone, not always, there may be someone with something else to say who doesn't have that opportunity. So I'm in favor of shortening it because I agree with the discussion that we have a lot of work to do that we're trying to do at 10:30, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night sometimes. But I do think that it would be wise to say, does anyone have something which hasn't been brought up, but which would like to say something? If we are at the 30 minutes, then to me, to cut off something which may be pertinent and someone who has something new to say. But again, we have to be on the honor system that that person truly has something new to say and not just repeating or rehashing.
If they are repeating, can we just then say, that's not news today?
Well, I've said that where I know we're going to have long public comment. I said, if you're in agreement with what's been said previously, we'd love to hear, and you can say you're in agreement, or if there's anything you want to amend or change. The other thing that I think we need to make sure people understand, because most people come with prepared remarks, is you can send us the remarks and we'll get them, we'll read them, we'll understand the points. So I know some other committees in town, it's almost exclusively the public comment comes in through email. So go ahead, Ms. McKim.
I liked when we did when we split the public comment, I think it was for the lights, where we asked people to hold their comments and speak specifically on the lights. Because I think that could end up being a little bit of a hybrid if we know we have a hot button issue where we know the public is coming to speak directly on that. And so, for example, we do a general public comment, we've got a guest come in and talk about, XYZ educational initiative. And then we can, if we know we've got an issue, we may not always be able to anticipate, but that could help us. If we know we've got a hot button, just to ask people to be in a specific public comment period.
So just from my perspective, listening in, it's a board decision, clearly. The alignment to the agenda items can get very problematic about, again, what Tom said, what is attached to agenda item, what is not. You've had clarification on a public discussion. If you want to add a public discussion, you can. I would just pause a wee bit. Sorry, that's a bad word plus, but I would just be contemplative of this. We got start and end, and then you're going to potentially go to a start with 30 minutes. Might be a big nut for the community to process, in the sense of, we're talking about communication, transparency. I would ponder maybe just go to the start of the meeting, and that's the compromise, and we move on from there as a first step and see how it goes. But that's just
I'm sorry, I don't understand what that.
we just have a public, just bear with the public comment at the start of the meeting,
And
and
not
there
have it at
and there
the
is
end.
not one at the end, and make that as a compromise. I'm not saying that's perfect. I'm just
Can we solve the problem of 11:30 at night?
Yeah.
Getting to
Well, yeah, and look, and to your point of, is it more specific? I mean, we've had a couple of nights where, I don't know, did we just have no public comment at previous meeting or so? So it kind of, some of it goes with agenda topics. Mrs. Best.
I do agree that none of us are at our best when we start getting into the real meat of the meeting at 10:30 p.m. Well, maybe I should always speak for myself.
You can speak to me on that one as well.
It's a huge change in our practice if we were to get rid of one or the other. There was the mention made by Mr. Mooney of asking people to sign up if we're going to make it a short window and people have to sign up in advance. That would be a big change in behavior, but maybe it's worth a try. And then my other thought was, if we wanted to encourage more people to email us, can we post those? Can we somehow make that more easily seen, so people feel like there is an audience hearing what they had to
I was
say?
thinking that exact same thing.
Just a
Yeah, so Alan and I have discussed that, and we've discussed it with Mooney too, that we also create, and again, it would be an education process, but we create an email so that people don't have to put all 9 of our names on an email. We create Board of Education email, and the emails come into that Board of Education email that we all have access to.
But didn't you also discuss, there are times when we get emails that may be problematic?
Well, the guidance from Mr. Mooney is that while we should review them and understand some of the points, and we can discuss some of the points, we should not be reading emails. We should not be reading letters. If the person doesn't want to come and publicly speak, we should not be reading the letters publicly, because tone, inference, there's something in there we really don't want to say. We don't want to get involved in that. So, Mr. Brown.
I think we had a discussion at one point back during pandemic that and I think we even created at one point, we had a board email address.
That's what we had talked about.
Right, where
Yeah.
people had emailed in and it was understood that if you send to this email address, you're now public and that's out there.
Yeah.
And with that, so I don't know if that's something we could revise or
Okay.
do. Because I mean, I know we get letters all the time when we read them, and I've made this point from just whether it's PowerPoints or letters, like it seems like a waste of our time if somebody's going to provide that written material in advance, which we do prepare, and then we have to hear it again. It's
Yeah.
just not an
Yeah.
efficient use of meeting time.
Is there a hybrid public comment in that the first public comment is a half hour specific to students? Because we have student reps who want to hear from students. There are no students. We move to the agenda and then we just move to public comment at the end.
My only concern is that if we move public comment completely to the end, and there's an action item and we're expected to vote on something, I want to hear from everybody before I vote.
But I think chances are too, if there's an action item, we've already discussed it, we're discussing it again.
Not always.
Not always.
So what, I agree with Mrs. Perrin. I think there's a difference between opining on something we're just beginning to discuss and something we're taking action on. If someone wants to voice on an action item, that's their last opportunity
Right.
to do so.
So maybe if I could pull your comment, Dennis, and is there somewhat of a consensus building around a 30-minute limit?
Sounds like it.
So when we're closing in on that 30 minutes, maybe, at minute 25 or something, say, listen, we're running out of our front end public comment. If anybody has anything new, please step up. But if they don't need to hear, people keep saying it and they close out the person, no, I'm sorry, but maybe we should try that forewarning and maybe it will be respectful enough not to repeat every comment that was coming out. And of course, they have the back end then to adhere to it. I just think it's really important that we get to the meeting. And that's a way of managing.
You could specifically ask about that action item too, right?
Mr. Deneen, if I can add,
Yes, Mr. Trenberg, of course.
it's the first time I spoke today.
Yeah.
Rusty?
If it is 30 minutes, the board can extend it. If there is a topic and more people are ready to speak, you can always
Good
you
to
can always
know.
move to extend.
Yep. Good.
Can I just
do
add?
think but I also think we have to balance like a lot of the stuff that generates public comment. We're discussing it, we're bringing it back, we're discussing it, and then we're having a vote. I mean, there's time out there and the information is out there. A lot of the stuff that we discuss and vote the same night doesn't necessarily have the focus on it that I think we're talking about. We're trying to make sure that we cover with the public. Mrs. Benson.
I was just going to ask, if we aren't going to ask people to sign up in advance, how are we going to choose who gets to speak and who ends up in that last ditch? Only speak now if you.
So it's interesting, most boards require a sign-up sheet, right? And I went through this with Mr. Mooney and explained to him how we work. He goes, sounds like it works really well. He goes, sometimes
Unlimited. right
sign-up
now.
sheets can be problematic, especially if you're doing in-person, you're doing Zoom. And I said, look, we usually take in-person first, then we go to Zoom, and then we have it in a meeting. He goes, if that works for you and nobody's saying, I didn't get called, you didn't see my hand, this, that, and the other thing, he goes, I don't see the point in adding a sign-up sheet.
But
to
that's
it."
with unlimited
Yeah,
time.
but that's not with a 30-minute
Right.
window.
Yeah. So maybe that's the point you're trying to make. We look at who signed up and then we can gauge based on the 3-minute rule that we have 30 minutes or 35 or a 40-minute public comment. But at what point do you close that?
And how do you
sign-up
offer
sheet?
the sign up if people are participating virtually as well as?
I'm
in
not
person?
suggesting it, but the year we did the public hearing virtually, people emailed me, because I was the secretary at the time, and I just took them in timestamp order.
Yeah.
Um,
Mr. Chairman, is 3 minutes too long? Can people?
Well, that was the other
Thinking the
question.
same thing there.
Can people at least try and concise 2 minutes?
It's interesting that the other data I had was the public comment went from 2 minutes to 5 minutes to unlimited. In, the other boards that I looked at. And there's boards in this town that seem to have unlimited public comment.
Is this one to table and take it to hopefully a new communications committee?
Sure,
I think that's a good idea.
they can come back with a proposal.
Does that make sense for everyone, or? I wouldn't mind we're going to talk about the communication committee, but maybe that's kind of the first order of business. I wouldn't mind starting the new school year with educating people as to how we're going to change anything we're going to change from a meeting standpoint. So,
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
it might be that we have to stop here because
Okay.
the hub are going to be here for a 12:30 start,
Okay.
and we probably have to get a bite to eat if that's. I know or do you want to quickly run down, but I'm just.
Just finish this real quick. Yeah. What's that? Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, okay. Provide one report on the class student distribution report. If we do
Yes.
it
Yes.
twice, I think it's-
Yes.
Eliminate PAR, the action items, you really don't, you can't legally do anything about it, so we'll report, but it's, right.
We'll
okay.
see it, but we don't have to.
My only concern about that is I love seeing where there's patterns of where.
Oh, you can see it?
where-
You'll see it. You'll see
Oh, we
it.
see it. We're
No-
just
no
about
vote.
Excellent. Okay, great.
Well, just you'll see it now.
We're already, the communications committee will continue to, right, that's,
Yep.
or is that a discussion here or
Well,
not?
I think we were hoping to decide today that we want one.
Yeah. So I'll just pose that out there and then we can, Jill and I can do the work behind the scenes, but can we all be in agreement that we need a communications committee? That is unanimous. Okay, so we will move
Decision.
forward with the communication committee, and Jill and I have talked. Jill did a lot of good work. I actually have a deck here. We talked about even a co-chair type organization. So, because Jill's done a lot of work on it, but Jill's also on a building committee and the vice chair. And so I think email me or call me with your thoughts on the who and the structure of it. And then I think we've got our first agenda item for communications committee around public comment and kind of board meeting structure. So good. So thank you. I think that's mission accomplished. Perfect.
I think in general terms, we would like to keep the executive session works best for
The
most
beginning of the
everybody at the beginning of the meeting where we can, with the provision that if there's an exceptional circumstance, we would ask for that. And then this is just approval of conference and PLC days just as part of the regular calendar process.
Yeah. Anything else anyone wanted to add on the kind of the things hanging out there that we want to kind of tick off our list? Okay. Anything from the cabinet? No, you're good. So with that, do you want to do a quick pause for lunch?
Word of the day.
I guess it will be, right?
We need a motion to.
Do pause the meeting. A motion to recess for what, 10 minutes for lunch and bio break, and then we'll come back to our next agenda item.
Who's motioning? Thank you, Joe. Who's second?
Julie. did.
Julie, all in
Thank you.
favor? Aye, thank you.
All in